Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. At first glance, these passages, both from the Sermon on the Mount, seem to be contradictory. In the 5th chapter of Matthew, Jesus says, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works." And in the 6th chapter, he says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men." So, which is it? Are we to let men see our good works, our righteousness, or not? Well, yes and no. We are to let our light shine before men in such a way that they may see our good works and glorify our Father who's in heaven. But we must beware of practicing our righteousness before men to be noticed by them. The motive makes a difference. Is our motive to bring glory to God or to be noticed by men and bring glory to ourselves? You know, two people can do the same thing, and one will be rewarded by God and the other not. Why? Because God judges the heart. He judges the motive. What you do doesn't matter nearly as much to God as why you do it. In fact, you can do something really stupid, something that has horrible consequences, and still be judged right if your motive was right. On the other hand, you can do something wonderful, something that benefits everyone, and be judged wrong if your motive was wrong. And that is why we must be very careful when passing judgment on someone's activities. Now, let's not make the leap to situational ethics here. There are some things that are always wrong and can never be made right by good motives. If an activity is prohibited by God, it's wrong. It's always wrong, and motive doesn't factor into it at all. It's wrong, and we can declare it to be so. And that's not judging. God judged the activity. We are simply relaying his verdict. But if the activity isn't prohibited, we can't judge it right or wrong, because its righteousness and rightness and wrongness depends on the motive of the one doing it. And again, only God can judge the heart. Now, we can comment on the outcome of the activity, and we can conclude it to be wise or foolish, but we cannot declare it to be right or wrong. And we need to take this a step further. Even something God has told us to do, even things that appear to be very righteous, can be wrong if done for the wrong reason. And that becomes very clear in our text for today, where Jesus warns us about religious theatrics. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. The phrase "to be noticed" is from a single Greek word from which we get our word theatrical. We could translate this verse, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men," as theatrics. For if you do, you have no reward with your Father who's in heaven. You know, God isn't impressed with religious theatrics, religious activities done to get attention, or I might add, theatrical and musical performances given the spotlight in a worship service. You know, we might be impressed by them, and They may draw huge crowds, but God is not impressed. Even what the Jews considered to be the three chief acts of piety can be reduced to theatrics if we do them to be noticed by men rather than to glorify our Father who's in heaven. And Jesus warned us about all three: theatrical giving, theatrical praying, and theatrical fasting. Let's continue in that 6th chapter. When therefore you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have the reward in full. But when you give alms, do not let your right hand know what your left hand is doing, or left and right, that your alms may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. Don't be like the hypocrites. The word was used by the Greeks of a play actor. Don't be like someone who thinks himself on a stage when you give alms, when you make charitable contributions. And Jesus assumed that we would be making charitable contributions. It's the right thing to do. And he's not saying it's wrong to give in the synagogue or in the streets. When God's people gathered for worship and instruction, they gave to support the work of the synagogue and to make funds available for charitable distribution by the elders. And that is still a righteous thing to do. And if you see someone advertising a need on the streets, you may need to pray for discernment about it, but it's not wrong to give them something. What's wrong is making a big show of your giving, of sounding a trumpet before you give, so everyone will notice what you're doing. Now, we really don't have any historical record of Jews actually sounding trumpets before they gave, so Jesus is probably using a figure of speech here, kind of like our blowing your own horn. The idea is giving in a way to be seen and honored by men. Jesus says if you do that, don't expect to be rewarded by God. Now, he's not suggesting that nothing good can come from such giving. The one receiving the gift will no doubt benefit from it, and you may find much pleasure from doing so. You may even be honored by men as a great benefactor, but don't expect God to be impressed. You got what you wanted from the transaction. If, however, you want God to honor you for your giving, give in a way that honors him, in a way that causes men to glorify your Father who's in heaven more than they honor you. The best way to do that might very well be to give in complete anonymity, not even letting your left hand know what your right hand is doing. You know, if someone doesn't know where something is coming from, the only one they can glorify is God. He's the only one they can thank. And that may be the best way to give to others. But we need not become paranoid about our giving. You know, some think giving by check is wrong because someone will know what they've given. And some feel no records of giving should be kept, even for IRS, because all giving should be done in secret. Biblical precedent doesn't really support such extremes. In the 4th chapter of Acts, we're told that owners of land and houses were selling their property and bringing the proceeds to the apostles for distribution to the needy. And Joseph, the one the apostles called Barnabas, or son of encouragement, was mentioned by name for doing so. His example was apparently used to encourage others to do the same. However, in the 5th chapter, we find this led to a problem. Ananias and Sapphira sold a piece of property and sought glory for doing so. They kept back some of the proceeds for themselves, but told the apostles they were giving it all. They wanted to be honored for their generosity, but were judged for their lying. Their motive for giving came into play here. in a big way. So why do we give? Is it to glorify self or to glorify God? If it's to glorify God, there's no problem with others finding out about it. But if you want others to find out about it so they'll honor you, that's the only reward you'll get for your giving. The same principle holds true when it comes to theatrical praying. And when you pray, you're not to be as the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners in order to be seen by men. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, and when you shut your door, pray to your Father who's in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. The Pharisees loved to pray in public. It looks so religious. And if you want to convince someone you're religious, what better way than to let them see you pray? And if you're a good actor, you can really impress your audience. But your audience won't be God. He's not impressed. Praying is simply talking to God. And he knows if you're talking to him or simply talking to make someone think you're talking to him. If your intent is to look religious, your prayer is answered when someone notices you. If your intent is to communicate with God, he listens. And that private communication generally takes place best in private. You know, you don't get into an intimate conversation with someone in a crowd. You go off by yourself so you can talk. The same is true with prayer. Most prayer is private conversation between you and God, and that's the way it ought to be. But that doesn't mean it's never appropriate to pray in public. Jesus isn't saying we should never pray in a place of worship or on the street, unless, of course, we're doing so to be seen by men. If a church becomes a stage where we can show off our oratorial skills, our reward will be the praises of those we impress. But if our public prayers, in church or elsewhere, are intended to honor God and to lead others to pray with us, they are most appropriate. You know, Jesus prayed publicly. Before he fed the 5,000, he didn't say, well, excuse me just a moment while I go offer thanks for this food in my private prayer closet. No, he publicly gave thanks and then distributed the food. And when Paul was aboard a ship heading for Rome and a storm came up that was so bad the sailors quit eating for 2 weeks, Paul took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all and broke it and began to eat. When he did so, the others were encouraged to do the same. That is what public prayer is for. It's intended to encourage others to also converse with God and to honor him. Now, to do that, the one doing the praying may have to give thought to what he will say. So it's not wrong to prepare for public prayer, to even write out a prayer. And it's not wrong to have in mind those who will be listening as you pray. You know, when asked to offer the prayer at a public or political gathering, I try to think of what the concerns might be of those gathered and address those concerns in prayer. But you do have to be careful, because it's very easy to start addressing those gathered rather than addressing God on their behalf. During the Civil War, a United States Senate chaplain started advising the senators on the conduct of the war and began telling God what he ought to make them do in his official prayers. Prayers that eventually led a senator to offer the following resolution. Resolved that the chaplain of the Senate be respectfully requested hereafter to pray to and supplicate God on our behalf, and not to lecture him, inform him what to do, or state to him under pretense of prayer his opinions in reference to his duty as the Almighty. And that the said chaplain be further requested, as aforesaid, not under the form of prayer, to lecture the Senate in relation to questions before the body. Well, the resolution didn't pass, but it's good advice to those who are willing to engage in public prayer. If our prayers are offered to call attention to our ideas or our piety, all we'll get out of those prayers is the attention we're seeking. And if we're preaching, don't call it prayer. Theatrical praying doesn't impress God. And neither does theatrical fasting. Now, we're going to skip over verses 7 through 15 until next week. So let's go on to Matthew 6, 16 through 18. And whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance in order to be seen fasting by men. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you may not be seen fasting by men, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. Now, fasting was a part of every Jew's life, and the more religious Jews fasted more often than others. The Pharisees fasted every Monday and Thursday from sunup to sundown, as well as all the prescribed days of fasting, and they made sure everyone knew when they were fasting. Now, Jesus didn't condemn fasting, but neither did he command it. He just assumed it would be done. Fasting is so religious. Fasting is done as an act of penance. Fasting is done to hopefully get God's attention. Fasting is done to demonstrate the power of the Spirit over the flesh. Fasting is done for a variety of religious reasons, and some of them may be good. If you're going without something so you can give it to someone else, that can be very good. Isaiah suggested that was a proper motive for fasting. Or if you're just too busy doing the Lord's work or too enthralled with His Word to take time out to eat, that's good. There are good reasons to fast. But I do think we should note that fasting is not commanded by God. It's practiced, and we have numerous examples of individuals and cities and even nations fasting, but I find no record of God ever commanding it. That doesn't mean it's wrong, only that it's optional. Self-denial is commanded, but fasting isn't. However, if you do choose to fast, don't do it to impress anyone. Don't make a big deal out of it. I almost hate to say this, but don't smear ashes on your head. Don't suck in your cheeks to look like you're starving. Don't hold a news conference to announce your fast. Unless, of course, you're doing it to be seen by men. But if that's your reason for fasting, your reward will be the attention you get from men. It won't come from God. God's not impressed with religious theatrics, no matter how convincing they might be. God judges our actions by looking into the heart. That's why we must be very careful when trying to measure a man's commitment to Christ by his external practices. We should see some external demonstrations of his commitment, and we ought to be concerned if we see none, for as James said, I will show you my faith by my works. But we must never assume the externals indicate everything is all right on the inside. And quite frankly, that's why we don't call people to religious practices. We don't have a list of things we demand you do, or even recommend that you do. We call people to Christ. We don't ask people to subscribe to a religious ritual. We don't want them doing something that they think they have to do to be a part of our church. We invite them to simply come clean before God. Search me, O God, and know my heart today. Try me, O Savior, know my thoughts, I pray. See if there be some wicked way in me. Cleanse me from every sin and set me free. That's my prayer this morning. And I pray that it's yours as well. Let's stand and offer it.